I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I've done over the last 12 months, and I've got a few snapshots which might be coming up later of what I did in the last 12 months. They're really a small look at what I saw over the journey and where I went. So please talk to me afterwards. They're just there to really invoke a little bit of interest, and every one of them has a story behind it. So how does someone who comes from Mundubbera, I've never actually lived anywhere else except for a brief stint in Brisbane for 12 months, which cost my parents a lot of money. I decided to come back home. But how does someone like myself end up on an incredible journey going around the world when I hear every day that there's no opportunities in a small town, there's no work in a small town? Where do our young people get these opportunities? And I'm here to tell you that I find opportunities in everything. I have no trouble finding things to do and experiences in a small town. So please don't tell me that you can't achieve something because you come from a rural area. Because I come from Mundubbera, I've lived here all my life, and I went to the boys' school about 5 minutes out of town, and I chose to come back here. I've got a family here that are actually in the audience, Tom and Jack and Darcy, and I wouldn't be anywhere else. I once thought that living in a small town was going to be boring, that when I was young and in primary school there was no way I was ever coming back here. But I'm so glad and so lucky I did. So, last year I got to go on a Nuffield scholarship. So what is a Nuffield scholarship? A Nuffield scholarship is an agricultural scholarship. It's 16 weeks, getting to travel around the world. Woo-hoo. And I studied genetic progression in cattle, which sounds pretty boring. And that kind of is, but what the other things that I brought back were far more profound than anything I could ever have to do with cattle. So how did I get a Nuffield scholarship? Well, you don't have to be an academic, you don't have to have graduated from a university, but what you do have to have is leadership experience. You have to have experience in and knowledge and research in your own study and your own industry. You absolutely have to have a passion for what you're doing, and you have to have a passion for your community. So, while I got a Nuffield scholarship, there's probably 20 applications at least that I could list that I didn't get in the previous 2 years. I had applied for Riddick Rural Women's Ward at least twice. I've never got it. Rising Champion from Cattle Council Australia, I never got it. Non-Executive Director of MLA, I didn't get it. But I just kept putting in, knowing that at some point I was going to get something. I would talk to them and say, what was I missing? What was the experience that I didn't have? And I would go out and get that experience. Well, where do you get experience in a small town? Volunteer. So I volunteered. I put my hand up for everything I possibly could. I have chaired various committees. I chaired an event, the Meat Profit Day in 2011 in Eidsvold. 900 people live in Eidsvold, and we got 500 to an event. That's pretty incredible. So that's where my leadership comes in. I didn't have a job in leadership. I had experience that I got in my community in Mundubbera and the surrounding areas, in Eidsvold, in my industry, in my cattle industry, and I was passionate about what I did. So when I saw that tweet that said Nuffield applications close in 2 weeks, and I said to Darcy I'd probably be away for 4 months next year, I knew I was ready for it. I wanted that opportunity, I wanted it like nothing else, and I knew if I wasn't going to get it that year, I was going to come back next year and give it another go. I was lucky enough to receive one. And that's where my journey last year started. And I'm going to talk now about some of the places that I went. And the one that had the most profound effect on me was India. I decided to travel to India because it was one of the places that there was no way I was ever going to go. It looked scary, it looked smelly, lots of people. And so I thought, this is the time to get out of my comfort zone. I'm going to do this. And I was there for 2 weeks. It was the most uncomfortable and confronting 2 weeks I've had in my life. I couldn't wait to get out of there, but I also can't wait to go back. It was just an amazing experience, and I want to talk to you about how you can look at the opportunities and find opportunities even when there are far greater problems than we've got here, or the resources that we've got here. So India was pretty uncomfortable if you're a woman, and I had asked a little bit of advice from previous scholars as to how it was, and unfortunately all the ones I asked were men, and they said, just wear long pants, you'll be fine. The other guys sort of said, well, it's okay, but it is a bit tough for a girl. Well, the first part when we got to the airport was all of the women getting shuffled off in a different direction to go through security. I didn't think that was too bad. When we got to the restaurant and they only brought 2 menus out for the men, I thought they were just running low on menus, and we're in a really poor country, so they just don't have many menus. But after about the 3rd day, when I realised that they actually only brought menus out for the men, I was starting to feel smaller and smaller, and I got a very small taste of what it's like not to be on equal terms with your colleagues. That was not a nice place to be, and as much as I enjoyed the people that I met there, I really struggled with that inequality. That brings me to some lovely women that I met in New Delhi, and they changed my perspective of what you can do with nothing, and to always try and look at things and look at what you could do rather than all the reasons that you can't. And I went to the slums in New Delhi, and I went to a place that is run by the Asha Foundation, or the Asha Society. And they started with one woman's vision, Dr. Kiran, and she came about 25 years ago. She was from a middle-class background. She's an Indian, and she stepped into the slums for the first time to help with a cholera outbreak. She thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. This can't happen. So she thought, well, what can I do? And she went round to government, she went round to various people that she knew. She couldn't find any funding. No one wanted to know about her cause. So she just started going down to the slums, and she started teaching in the street. And all she was teaching was about basic hygiene. She was talking about the rat infestation and how that causes disease. Things that these people just didn't know. She just started talking one on one. Well, it was in some person's home. She couldn't even get a landlord to rent her a house or a room in that area because they were frightened of an uprising. They were really scared of what might happen. She didn't let that stop her. She had a vision, and she could just imagine what it would look like if she could. So she started asking each one of those landlords and saying to them, I'm not teaching them to be disrespectful or disobedient. I'm teaching them to be better tenants. They're going to clean their own homes. They're going to keep things much better, so you won't have to do as much work. You won't get as much complaints. Eventually, one landlord said she could use a bit of land over there, and that's where they started gathering. Firstly, she was teaching 1 and 2 women at a time, and then 10 women. And then those 10 women started teaching another 10 women about very basic stuff, about how to have a baby and tie the cord off cleanly, how to ensure that their kids are rehydrated after dysentery, how to stop E. coli, stuff that we take for granted. Well, of course, now she had a problem with the husbands because they definitely didn't want disobedient wives. There was no way you could have that. So she had to go round to many of the husbands individually so that they would let their wives go along to her school in the street. Otherwise, they weren't allowed. Now, she went and saw the husband. She said, look, I'm not teaching them to be disobedient. They're going to be able to do all these things around the home. You're going to have a wonderful place when you come home. You won't get this nagging wife. A couple of them said, yeah, righto. Many months later, she had 400 women. Then she had 1,000. 25 years later, when I was there last year, they are in 50 different slums. They help over 400,000 people. Now, they do have some international help, and there's charities around Australia that actually help fund them, but they still have really limited resources. They have 1 or 2 schools per slum, and it's not really enough for the amount of kids. But there's no way that they were going to send kids away, even though they don't have the resources to teach all those children. What are you going to do when you've got too many kids and you've only got 1 school? Well, we'll just open it longer. So the girls go in the morning from 5 o'clock till lunchtime, and then they do their chores. The boys have worked in the morning with their fathers, and then they go along to the afternoon school and they finish at 8 or 9 o'clock. Not ideal, not in our world, but they're getting an education. Last year they helped 900 participants in university go from those slums. It was one person's vision, one woman's vision, and there was so many things. There's millions of reasons why it can't work, but it does. And I met with some of the women that were in that first 10 or 15, the first groups that came. And they are articulate, they know English now, they are amazing leaders in their group. But they're not stopping there. They have this children's club. They know that they need to start with the kids because they're our future. So they have these children, and some of them were as young as 11, and they were the leaders of their club, and they met with us, and they talked in English, and they told us about their plans. Now, we met an 11-year-old who can assess someone for dysentery and takes a first aid kit to them. She knows when the women in her area, if one of them goes into labour, that they need to go to hospital, because it's still culturally not that great to go to hospital. You should have it in your home. So she knows to tell that woman to go to hospital when she has a baby. And if she doesn't, she comes and tells the other ladies, and they go and help. She knows what causes infection. She knows that they've got to keep their street clean, and they have all these little areas that they're all in charge for. Those kids are changing the world, and one person had the vision of what they could do if they could. So I took that away from India, and I thought, well, with the resources that we have in Australia and with what we've got, what could we do if we could? While I was in India, I also met with another man called Ramesh. Now, I thought Ramesh he was a businessman. I kind of called him my guru because he was very much in touch with life and the balance of life, and he gave us some really profound advice at times. And he had given up his 10 days to take 6 agricultural people from Australia and New Zealand around his southern India. He didn't get anything for it. He didn't want anything for it. He just wanted to do it because he liked showing people his India, and he wanted us to see all of what was happening. Now, he also helped young people as entrepreneurs. If they had a good business idea, he actually put some of the money up because he believed that each one of those would produce their own income from their family. Not because he was going to make huge amounts of money out of it, but just because he believed that that was the right thing to do. He has a vision for his village, which has 40,000 people in it, that it can be a better place. And you can see some of the people that he was with, and they are changing lives. They have a problem over there with compost, or with cow manure actually, and there's a lot of it. And they don't have a lot of land space. So what were they doing? They were burning it all. So it's all going up into the atmosphere. It's actually a really good resource. And they were running out of nutrients on the land, and he actually owns a fertiliser company. But he thought there's this huge resource going to waste. So he gets together with a scientist. Now, all he had was a vision that we need to reduce the amount of time that we can go from cow dung to compost. And if you understand the process, it's actually really complicated, and I don't. But they took it from going from about 50 days down to about 11 days. which has huge ramifications for somewhere like India, where they can't store this stuff anywhere. And now it's going back on the fields, which is reducing the cost for farmers. He didn't know what he was going to end up with. He just had a vision of what it could look like if they could do that. There was a lot of reasons why it wouldn't work and why it can't work, but now they're applying it to sugar mills and all sorts of other things. So what can we do in Mundubbera with all of the stuff that we've got? I try and apply that to what I do every day, and it's not easy. We've got a drought, we had a flood last year. There's all sorts of reasons why it's not going to work. But I just focus on what it will look like if I could do it. And so many of the other things, they just go away, they just drift off, and you find a way around the roadblock, and it's like the girls at the Asher Foundation. There were so many roadblocks, there were so many reasons why that wouldn't work, and yet it has, and it's worked on a massive scale. Now, I went to a few other places. The Ukraine was interesting. Again, a different type of poverty, a communist country, and it's obviously in the news for quite the last few weeks with civil unrest. But again, they have opportunity there for agriculture. They've got this massive food bowl. And what is coming through now is entrepreneurs there's all the reasons why they can't. They can't own the land, yet they're just farming on it. Nobody owns that land, it's still all in the state, but they just decided that's not a reason why I can't do it, it's not a reason why I can't produce food. I'm going to go out and do it. And they have been doing it. And they're still way behind what we're doing in Australia in terms of farming. But when you see where they've come from and not being able to feed their own people and have a starvation there in probably 30 years ago, they've come so far. And it's all about having a vision of what it would look like. So that's my challenge to you, is to think about what your life could look like and focus on that. What your community could look like, perhaps what your business could look like, and focus on that, not all the reasons why we can't do something. Thank you.